Johnny Carson walked off his own set when Frank Sinatra arrived. Frank stood there speechless, and Johnny never returned to that studio again. March 15, 1976, 8:23 p.m., NBC Studio One, Burbank, California. The Tonight Show was celebrating its 10th anniversary. 300 people packed the studio. The biggest names in Hollywood filled the seats. Dean Martin in the front row, Don Rickles waiting to roast Johnny, Ed McMahon behind the desk, that famous laugh echoing through the room. 15 million people watching at home, 15 million Americans tuning in to see the king of late night at his absolute peak. And Johnny was delivering. 90 minutes into the show, he hadn't missed a beat. Every joke landed perfectly. Every pause, every gesture, every sip from that coffee mug, timed to perfection. This was Johnny Carson doing what nobody else could do. The studio lights blazed hot. The cameras rolled. The orchestra was tight. Doc Severinsen and his band ready for every cue. Johnny was mid-monologue doing his famous golf swing gesture when the stage manager appeared, running across the studio floor during a live taping. That never happened. The stage manager whispered something urgent in Johnny's ear. Johnny's smile died. Right there on camera, his face went blank. The audience stopped laughing. The studio went quiet. Johnny looked toward the entrance. The double doors opened, and through them walked Frank Sinatra, the chairman of the board himself. Dressed in a perfect tuxedo, that unmistakable presence, Frank Sinatra, who had been banned from The Tonight Show for 8 years, Frank Sinatra walking onto Johnny's set uninvited, unannounced, absolutely forbidden from being there. 300 people held their breath. Frank walked toward the stage, blue eyes locked on Johnny, and Johnny just stood there, microphone in hand, staring at the man who represented everything he'd spent his career standing against. If you want to know what happened next, stay until the end, because what these two men said that night has never been told. Hit subscribe right now. Smash the like and comment where you're watching from, because this story is about to shock you. The truth starts now. Johnny looked at Frank. Frank looked back. Their eyes met across that studio. Two legends, two different eras of American entertainment, standing face to face. Johnny saw everything in Frank's eyes that he'd fought against his whole career. The arrogance, the entitlement, the belief that rules didn't apply to certain people. Frank Sinatra represented everything Johnny Carson rejected. The Vegas swagger, the Rat Pack attitude, the idea that being famous meant you could treat people however you wanted. Johnny had built his reputation on being different, professional, controlled, fair. The guy who showed up on time, treated his crew with respect, never let ego overtake talent. Johnny looked at Frank and saw his father, not literally, but that commanding presence, that voice expecting obedience. Johnny's father had been hard, cold, critical, never satisfied, never proud. And Johnny had spent 40 years running from men like that. Now Frank Sinatra stood on his stage on his anniversary night, representing everything Johnny had been running from his whole life. The audience sat in complete silence. 300 people watching this standoff. Dean Martin leaned forward. Don Rickles stopped smoking. Ed McMahon froze. The cameras kept rolling. Johnny made his decision. He reached up, unclipped his microphone and set it down. Didn't say a word. Didn't acknowledge Frank. Didn't acknowledge the audience. Just turned around and walked off his own set. The curtain fell. The house lights came up. 300 people sat in shock. Johnny Carson had just abandoned his anniversary show mid-taping because Frank Sinatra walked in. Frank started to applaud. Slow, deliberate claps echoing through the silent studio. Then Dean joined in. Then Don Rickles. Then the whole audience following Frank's lead, applauding the empty stage. Frank was honoring Johnny's exit, treating it like the most dignified thing he'd ever witnessed, and somehow that respect made the humiliation complete. But what none of those 300 people knew was that Frank Sinatra wasn't there to embarrass Johnny Carson. He was there to save his own life. And what happened in Johnny's dressing room in the next 10 minutes would prove that sometimes the people we hate most actually understand us best. Johnny sat in his dressing room staring at his mirror. His hands shook. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by shame, embarrassment, the crushing weight of knowing he'd destroyed his reputation in front of everyone who mattered. He poured real scotch, not the apple juice from camera, the expensive kind that burned. Needed something to cut through the noise, replaying what he'd done. The knock came. "Go away," Johnny said. His voice sounded rough, broken. "I need to speak with you, Mr. Carson." That Memphis draw. Frank Sinatra was outside his door. Johnny didn't move. The door opened anyway. Frank walked in, closed it behind him, stood there in his tuxedo, looking serious. "What you did out there took more courage than anything I've done on a stage," Frank said quietly. Johnny laughed bitterly. "Courage? I humiliated myself in front of 15 million people, Frank. I walked off my own show. Don't talk to me about courage. You stood up for something. You made a statement. Everyone knows how you feel about me now. That's not humiliation. That's honesty. And honesty is the one thing this business never allows." Johnny finally looked at him. Really looked. Frank was 60 but looked older tonight. There were lines Johnny hadn't noticed before. A tiredness in those famous blue eyes. "Why are you here, Frank?" "Really? Here? You knew you were banned. You knew this was my night. So why?" Frank reached into his jacket, pulled out a paper, medical letterhead, handed it to Johnny without a word. Johnny read the first lines and felt his stomach drop. "Throat cancer," Frank said softly. "Stage 3. The doctors gave me 6 months. Maybe a year if I'm lucky." Johnny stared at the paper. "Malignant tumor, aggressive growth, vocal cord involvement, recommended immediate surgery." The voice. The man whose singing had defined American music for 3 decades. Dying from cancer in his throat. "Frank, I came here tonight because I'm dying, Johnny. And before I go, I needed to make things right with the one person in this business, whoever had the guts to tell me no." Johnny set down the report. "Apologize? No, I came to ask for help because you're the only one who can give me what I need. And I'm too proud to beg, but I'm also too scared to die without trying." The question hung between them. 2 men who'd been enemies for 8 years, standing in a dressing room, walls coming down, masks slipping. "What do you need, Frank?" Johnny asked. And what Frank said next would change everything Johnny thought he knew about this man, about their history, and about what really mattered when you were staring death in the face. "I need to tell my story," Frank said. "The real story, not the legend, not the chairman of the board. The truth about who I am before cancer takes my voice forever." Johnny stood up. "You want an interview on your show tomorrow night? 1 hour, no commercial breaks, no pre-screen questions, no handlers, just you and me, talking like human beings instead of celebrities." Frank's voice cracked. "The doctors want surgery next week. I'll live, but I'll never sing again. Never speak the same way. This voice that's been everything to me will be gone. I can't let it disappear without using it one last time to tell the truth." Johnny sat back down. Frank Sinatra, banned for 8 years, asking for one final interview before cancer stole his voice. This wasn't just television. This was history. "Why me?" Johnny asked. "You could go to any network. They'd all say yes because they'd treat it like a circus. They'd want me to sing. They'd want old stories. They'd want Frank Sinatra, the legend. You're the only one who would treat it like a real conversation. The only one who'd ask hard questions and actually listen." Johnny poured Frank a drink. They both sat down, 2 men in tuxedos in a dressing room. "Tell me about the band," Johnny said. "The real story." Frank took a long drink. 1968 Jack Parr's show, your predecessor. There was a producer, Mitchell Barnes. During commercial break, he made an anti-Semitic comment about my piano player. Called him a slur. My piano player was one of my oldest friends. A guy who'd been with me since the beginning, taught me half of what I knew about music. This producer thought he could insult him because he was just a musician. "So you lost your temper." I grabbed Barnes by his collar, told him if he ever spoke about my friend like that again, I'd make sure he never worked in this town. The network spun it as "Sinatra threatens producer." Banned me from all NBC programs. I never told anyone the real reason because Barnes had 3 kids and a mortgage. I didn't want to destroy his life even if he deserved it. Johnny stared. "You've carried that for 8 years. You let your reputation get worse rather than expose him." My reputation was already bad. One more story wouldn't change anything. But Barnes's kids didn't deserve to suffer because their father was ignorant. Johnny had completely misunderstood this man, had judged him based on headlines and gossip, had seen Frank as everything wrong with old Hollywood, when really Frank had been protecting someone. "I remind you of your father, don't I?" Frank said softly. "I saw it in your eyes on that stage. I've seen that look before. My own kids look at me that way sometimes." Johnny's throat tightened. "How did you know?" "Because I was you once. Had a father who was hard, demanding, impossible to please. Became a performer to get approval. I never got it home. Built this tough guy swagger to hide that I was just a scared kid from Hoboken who weighed 119 pounds and got beaten up every day going to school." "My father never said he was proud," Johnny said quietly. "Not once. Even after I got this show, after I became the biggest thing in television, he just said, 'Don't let it go to your head.' That was it." "And you became a performer to prove him wrong," Frank said, "to show him you were somebody. To make people love you, because he never would." "Yes," Johnny whispered. "Me too. Spent 60 years on stages around the world, singing my heart out, trying to feel worthy, trying to fill the hole my father left. Now I'm dying and I realized I've spent my whole life performing for a man who's been dead for 20 years. Spent my whole life being angry at people who reminded me of him instead of understanding they were fighting the same fight. They sat there, two kings of American entertainment, tears running down both their faces, seeing each other clearly for the first time. Do the interview with me, Johnny Frank said. Help me tell the truth before it's too late. Help me be honest about the loneliness, the fear, the masks we wear. Help me give something real to people instead of just another performance." Johnny nodded. "Tomorrow night, 8 o'clock, 1 full hour, no restrictions. We'll tell your story the right way, Frank." They shook hands. 8 years of anger dissolved. Two men who'd been enemies became friends. Two performers who'd hidden behind personas decided to be honest. For one night, they would show the world what it looked like when legends stopped performing and started being human. But they would never get that chance, because someone had been listening to every word, and what that person did next would destroy everything. Lawrence Hartman had been standing outside Johnny's dressing room for 20 minutes. The executive vice president of NBC programming, the man who controlled everything on this network. He'd come to check on Johnny after the walk-off, but then he heard voices, Johnny and Frank talking, and he stopped to listen. He heard everything: the cancer diagnosis, the planned interview, Frank's confession about the ban, Johnny's agreement to give him a full hour tomorrow night, and with every word, Hartman's blood pressure rose. The Tonight Show was NBC's biggest asset. $50 million in annual revenue, the foundation of the network's entire late-night strategy. Johnny Carson was untouchable, unshakable, the safest bet in television. And Frank Sinatra's cancer interview would destroy all of that in one night. Hartman pulled out his phone right there, called the network president at home, almost midnight, but this couldn't wait. "We have a problem," Hartman said. Johnny just agreed to give Frank Sinatra a full hour tomorrow night to announce he has terminal throat cancer. What? Johnny knows Frank is banned. He doesn't care. They made up. They're planning the most depressing interview in television history. Cancer, death, the end of Frank Sinatra's voice on The Tonight Show tomorrow night. "Kill it," the president said immediately. "I don't care how. Kill that interview. Johnny won't back down. You know how he is. Then remind him who owns that show. Remind him The Tonight Show belongs to NBC, not him. Remind him we can make his life very difficult if he doesn't play ball." Hartman hung up and made his next call to Frank's hotel. Frank's manager answered, Eddie Romano, who'd been handling Frank's career for 15 years. "Eddie, it's Lawrence Hartman from NBC. I need to speak with Frank immediately. He's not taking calls. He's exhausted. Tell him it's about tomorrow's appearance on The Tonight Show." Pause. Then Eddie's voice came back harder. "What appearance?" "Johnny Carson just invited him for tomorrow night. Didn't Frank tell you?" Another pause. "No, he didn't mention anything." That's interesting because Johnny seemed very excited. Said it was going to be the biggest interview of his career. Frank's going to reveal some pretty personal information. Medical information. "What kind of medical information?" Eddie's voice went ice cold. "I think you should ask Frank. But between you and me, Eddie, this interview is a terrible idea. Frank's going to make himself look weak, vulnerable. That's not good for his image. That's not good for his legacy. And it's definitely not good for the comeback tour you've been planning. There's no comeback tour. Eddie said there could be if Frank handles this right. But if he goes on national television and tells 15 million people he's dying, that he's losing his voice, that he's scared, that's career suicide, Eddie. You know it, and I know it. Eddie Romano was a businessman first, a friend second. Always had been. I'll handle it, Eddie said finally. The interview won't happen. Good. And Eddie, make sure Frank understands this came from his people, not from us. Make sure he knows his own team is protecting him. Understood. Hartman hung up and smiled. Problem solved. By tomorrow morning, Frank would think his own manager convinced him to cancel. Johnny would think Frank got cold feet. Neither would know NBC orchestrated the whole thing. What Hartman didn't know was that Eddie Romano had already decided to leave Frank's employment anyway, had been offered a better position with a younger client. This was the perfect excuse to burn the bridge on his way out. Eddie called Frank's hotel room, told him the interview was a mistake, told him Johnny was using him for ratings, told him real friends don't exploit dying men for television moments. And Frank, exhausted and emotional, believed him. By 2 a.m., Frank had left Los Angeles, checked out, and flew back to Palm Springs without telling anyone. By 8 a.m., Johnny was calling Frank's hotel and getting no answer. By noon, Johnny had left 7 messages that would never be returned, and the friendship that lasted exactly 3 hours was over before it began. Johnny never went back to NBC Studio One. Couldn't do it. Couldn't walk onto that stage where he'd walked off, where he'd made and broken a promise in the same night. He requested all future tapings be moved to Studio 3. The network agreed without question. They'd gotten what they wanted. The dangerous interview was canceled. Johnny was back under control. But something had broken in Johnny that night. The people closest to him could see it. Ed McMahon noticed first. The way Johnny's smile took longer to appear during tapings. The way his laugh sounded hollow. The way he'd stare off during commercial breaks like he was somewhere else. "You okay, boss?" Ed asked one night a week after. "Fine," Johnny said. And that was the end of it. Johnny didn't talk about Frank. Didn't mention the walk-off. Didn't explain what happened in that dressing room. Just kept showing up, kept doing the show, kept being Johnny Carson for 15 million people who never knew anything was wrong. Frank never revealed his cancer diagnosis publicly. Got surgery in Switzerland where American press couldn't follow. Had his vocal cords removed in August 1976. Survived the operation, but lost his voice. Could only whisper after that. Could never sing again. The chairman of the board silenced forever at 60. He tried to perform one last time. December 1976. A charity event in Palm Springs. Stood on stage, tried to sing My Way with a backing track, but all that came out was a rasp, a whisper, a shadow of what his voice used to be. The audience applauded anyway, but Frank saw the pity in their eyes, saw them mourning what he used to be instead of celebrating what he was. He walked off that stage and never performed again. Johnny and Frank saw each other one more time. 1985 Kennedy Center Honors, both receiving Lifetime Achievement Awards. They stood on that stage, 10 feet apart, accepting their medals and never looked at each other. Not once. The cameras caught it. That careful distance, that deliberate avoidance. Entertainment reporters called it a mystery. Frank Sinatra died on May 14, 1998. Heart attack. 82 years old. Surrounded by family, but alone in the ways that mattered. Johnny Carson didn't attend the funeral. Stayed home in Malibu, watching old Sinatra performances on television, crying for what could have been. Johnny lived 7 more years, retired from The Tonight Show in 1992 after 30 years, spent his final years isolated, wealthy, celebrated, completely alone. 2 kings who'd built kingdoms and had nobody to share them with. Johnny Carson died on January 23, 2005, emphysema, 79 years old, in his home by himself, exactly the way he'd always feared. And Lawrence Hartman, he retired in 1995 with a $30 million golden parachute, died in 2003 on a golf course. His obituary called him a legendary television executive, never mentioned what he'd destroyed. NBC demolished Studio One in 2007, built a parking structure where Johnny Carson once walked off his own show, where Frank Sinatra stood under hot lights, applauding an empty stage, where two legends found each other for 3 hours and then lost each other forever. The building is gone, the set is gone, the cameras and lights and audience seats are all gone. But the story survives, and the lesson survives. Made choices that night. Johnny chose honesty over image. Frank chose vulnerability over pride. Lawrence Hartman chose money over humanity. Johnny's consequence was living with regret for 29 years. Frank's consequence was dying without ever getting to tell his truth. Hartman's consequence was being remembered as a success while actually being a villain. Here's what nobody tells you about the entertainment industry. It's not run by artists. It's run by accountants. People who measure everything in ratings and revenue and quarterly projections. People who see human beings as assets, relationships as transactions, and moments of real connection as threats to profitability. Lawrence Hartman didn't destroy Johnny and Frank's friendship because he was evil. He destroyed it because letting them be honest was bad for business. Not that two men had a fight, not that two celebrities had egos, but that genuine human connection was sacrificed on the altar of corporate profit. That vulnerability was seen as weakness. That honesty was considered dangerous. That the greatest interview in television history never happened because it would have made advertisers uncomfortable. The lesson here isn't just about Johnny and Frank. It's about all of us. How many friendships have we lost because we were too proud to apologize? How many connections have we missed because we were too scared to be vulnerable? How many times have we let other people's expectations keep us from being honest? Johnny Carson spent 29 years wishing he'd done that interview anyway, wishing he'd told NBC to sue him, told Hartman to go to hell, told Frank that their friendship mattered more than his career. But he didn't. He chose safety. He chose control. He chose protecting his image over protecting his humanity. And he regretted it until the day he died. Frank Sinatra spent 22 years without his voice, unable to sing, unable to speak the way he used to, carrying the weight of all the things he never got to say. He'd found someone who would have listened, someone who would have understood, and then he lost that person before he ever got the chance. Don't make their mistake. Don't let pride keep you from the people who matter. Don't let fear keep you from being honest. Don't let other people's opinions dictate your choices. Don't wait until it's too late to say what needs to be said. Time doesn't wait. Cancer doesn't wait. Death doesn't wait, and neither should you. If there's someone you need to call them today. If there's something you need to say it now. If there's a bridge you need to cross, start walking because tomorrow isn't promised. Before you go, hit that like button, subscribe to this channel, and drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching this from. Because stories like this need to be shared. Lessons like this need to be remembered. Rest in peace, Johnny Carson, 1925 to 2005. The king of late night who learned too late that connection matters more than control. Rest in peace, Frank Sinatra, 1915 to 1998. The chairman of the board who lost his voice but never lost his dignity. Two legends, one night, one promise, one betrayal, and one lesson that echoes across the decades. Don't let corporations control your humanity. Don't let money dictate your morality. Don't let fear steal your chance to be real. Because in the end, the only thing that matters is the connections we make, and the truth we tell, and the love we show before time runs out. And time always runs out.